Bandits attacked an old man. Then a bear suddenly appeared and shocked everyone. The morning mist clung to the ancient pines like gossamer veils, dancing in the first light of dawn. Samuel Matthews stood on the weathered porch of his cabin, a coffee mug warming his gnarled hands as he watched the forest awaken. At 65, his hair had long since turned silver, but his eyes remained as sharp as they had been during his decades as a park ranger. 20 young rangers had trained under him before he retired, yet none had truly grasped what he had tried to teach them: that the forest was more than just a collection of trees and animals. It was a living, breathing entity with its own wisdom. A familiar chickadee landed on the porch railing, tilting its head expectantly. "Always right on time, aren't you, Charlie?" Samuel chuckled, reaching into his pocket for the seeds he kept there. The bird had been visiting for 3 years now, bringing its mate and later its offspring. Such constancy was what Samuel loved most about his life here. His garden stretched before him, a testament to patience and an understanding of natural cycles. Vegetables grew alongside wildflowers, creating a harmony that attracted both pollinators and wildlife. A young deer and her fawn often visited at dusk, sampling the clover he had planted specifically for them. Some might call it counterproductive to invite wildlife into a vegetable garden, but Samuel had learned long ago that there was always enough to share if planned properly. The sound of an approaching vehicle drew his attention. Visitors were rare these days, so especially this early. Through the trees, he recognized Tom Wilson's old pickup truck, and his expression grew thoughtful. As the head of the village council, Tom rarely made social calls. "Morning, Sam," Tom called out, climbing from his truck. At 50, Tom still moved with the energy of a younger man, but today, there was tension in his shoulders. "Got a moment to talk?" Samuel gestured to the second chair on his porch, a spot that had hosted countless conversations over the years. "Coffee's fresh," he offered, already moving to fetch another mug. When he returned, Tom was staring into the forest, his usual jovial expression replaced by concern. "The bandits hit another town yesterday," Tom said without preamble. 30 miles north, cleaned out the general store, and threatened the owner's family. He accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "People are scared, Sam. They're talking about forming patrols, setting up barriers." Samuel settled into his chair, considering. He had heard the rumors growing over the past month, stories of a group of men taking advantage of the region's isolated communities. "Barriers won't stop them," he said finally. "They'll just make people feel trapped." "What would you suggest? You've dealt with all sorts of threats in your time as a ranger." Samuel watched as Charlie returned, this time with his mate. Both birds continued their morning routine as if nothing had changed. "The forest teaches us something important about security," he began, his voice taking on the tone that had earned him the nickname the Forest Sage during his ranger days. "The strongest defenses are the ones that work with nature, not against it." Tom leaned forward, interested despite his anxiety. "Meaning?" "Meaning we need to understand what we're dealing with before we react. These men, they're choosing isolated targets, using fear as a weapon. But fear makes people predictable, makes them easy targets." As if to emphasize his point, a red-tailed hawk swooped low over the garden, causing the chickadees to take shelter in a nearby bush. Once the danger passed, they emerged, resuming their activities, but with greater awareness of their surroundings. "Watch and learn," Samuel continued, gesturing to the birds. "They don't abandon their territory or hide forever. They adapt, stay alert, and support each other." Tom sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "The younger folks want action, Sam. They're talking about armed patrols, guard dogs, the works." Samuel recalled similar conversations from his ranger days, when fear of predators gripped communities. The solution was never as simple as building higher fences or carrying bigger guns. "Tell them I'll come to the next council meeting," he said finally. "Maybe it's time to share some old ranger wisdom." After Tom left, Samuel spent the morning tending his garden, but his mind remained focused on the problem. The forest had taught him that every creature, even those that seemed threatening, had its place. These bandits were human predators, but like all predators, they followed patterns. Understanding those patterns would be key to protecting the community.
As evening approached, he sat in his favorite spot by the river, fishing rod in hand more from habit than any real intention to catch anything. A large brown bear he'd named Martha lumbered down to drink on the opposite bank, her 2 cubs playing nearby. Years ago, he'd found her caught in an illegal trap, and the trust built during her rescue had created a unique understanding between them. "What do you think, old girl?" he murmured, watching as she carefully supervised her cubs. "Looks like retirement might have to wait a bit longer." The setting sun painted the water in shades of gold and crimson, and Samuel felt the familiar peace of the forest settling over him. Whatever came next, he knew this place would guide him, as it always had. The forest had its own way of handling threats, and after 40 years as its guardian, Samuel had learned to trust its wisdom. The village council meeting hall buzzed with anxious energy as Samuel took his place at the front. Faces both familiar and new turned toward him, seeking answers he wasn't sure they were ready to hear. Tom stood beside him, calling the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. "As promised, we have Samuel Matthews here to share his thoughts on our current situation." The crowd settled, though tension remained palpable in the air. Samuel surveyed the room, noting the mix of fear and determination in their eyes. "For 40 years, I watched over these forests," he began, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "Learned its rhythms, its ways of handling threats. What we're facing now isn't so different from a wolf pack testing territory." Young Mark Johnson, whose family ran the local hardware store, stood up. "With all due respect, Mr. Matthews, these aren't wolves. They're armed men who've already hurt people." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Samuel nodded, acknowledging the point. "True enough. But like wolves, they follow patterns. They choose isolated targets, strike when people are most vulnerable, and rely on fear to make their job easier." He pulled out a map he'd spent the morning preparing, marking the locations of recent attacks. "Look here, they're moving in a clear pattern, following the old logging roads, hitting communities that lack strong connections with their neighbors." The room grew quiet as people studied the pattern emerging on the map. Samuel continued, "We don't need walls or armed patrols. We need awareness, communication, and community." Over the next hour, he outlined his plan: a network of watchers, strategic lighting, and most importantly, regular gatherings that would strengthen community bonds, while making the village a less attractive target. Some, like Mark, remained skeptical, but others began nodding in understanding. The meeting was winding down when Martha, the local school teacher, burst in. There at the Peterson farm, the room erupted in chaos, but Samuel's voice cut through the noise. "Tom, call the sheriff. Mark, get your truck. The rest of you, stay here and stay calm." Outside, the autumn evening had turned cold, a reminder that winter wasn't far off. As they drove toward the Peterson place, Samuel remembered something his father had taught him: the most dangerous moment is when fear meets opportunity. The Peterson farm came into view, and Samuel spotted 3 unfamiliar vehicles parked haphazardly near the barn. "Stop here," he instructed Mark, getting out quietly. "Circle round back, but don't engage. Just observe and wait for the sheriff." The young man nodded, fear and determination warring in his expression. Samuel moved through the darkness with the stealth of decades spent tracking wildlife. Voices drifted from the barn, harsh, demanding tones mixing with Jim Peterson's steady replies. As he crept closer, a familiar sound made him freeze, the deep huffing breath of a large bear. Martha had chosen this moment to investigate the disturbance in her territory. Samuel watched as the massive bear emerged from the tree line, her presence immediately commanding attention. The bandits, focused on intimidating Peterson, didn't notice at first, but their horses did, whinnying in panic. When they finally turned, the sight of a full-grown brown bear approaching their position sent them scrambling for their vehicles. Shots were fired wildly into the air, more from fear than aim, as they retreated in disarray. Martha stood her ground, a living embodiment of the forest's power, until the last vehicle disappeared down the drive. Only then did she turn, meeting Samuel's eyes briefly before melting back into the forest. By the time the sheriff arrived, the immediate danger had passed. As Samuel gave his statement, he couldn't help but smile at the irony. The very wildlife some feared had become their unexpected protector. The incident at Peterson's farm became a turning point. The community began implementing Samuel's suggestions with renewed enthusiasm, understanding now that strength lay not in walls and weapons, but in awareness and unity. That night, sitting on his porch, Samuel raised his coffee mug in a silent toast to Martha. The forest had shown them the way, as it always did. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, the night was peaceful, filled with the familiar sounds of his wild neighbors going about their business. A new chapter was beginning, one that would test them all, but Samuel felt ready. The forest had taught him well. News of the bear's intervention at Peterson's farm spread quickly, transforming fear into fascination among the villagers. Samuel found himself fielding countless questions about Martha and the forest's other inhabitants, seizing the opportunity to deepen the community's understanding of their wild neighbors. One crisp morning, while checking the new warning system they'd established, Samuel encountered an unexpected visitor. A man stood at the edge of his property, shoulders hunched, uncertainty evident in his stance. Recognition hit like a thunderbolt. This was one of the bandits from Peterson's farm. "I've been watching you," the man said before Samuel could speak. "Name's Derek. I want to talk." Samuel studied him carefully, noting the absence of weapons and the genuine distress in his expression. "Coffee's hot," he replied simply, gesturing toward the porch. Over steaming mugs, Derek's story unfolded. Once a forest ranger himself in another state, he'd lost his way after personal tragedy, eventually falling in with the wrong crowd. The encounter with Martha had shaken something loose in him, reminding him of why he'd chosen his original path. "When that bear appeared, it wasn't just fear I felt," Derek explained, staring into his coffee. "It was shame, like the forest itself was judging me." Samuel listened, recognizing the transformative power of such moments. "The forest has a way of showing us our true selves," he offered. "Question is, what do you plan to do with that knowledge?" Derek's response surprised him. Information about the remaining bandits, their patterns, their weaknesses. More importantly, he offered to help protect the community he'd once targeted. The decision to trust Derek wasn't easy, but Samuel had learned to read people, as well as he read nature's signs. Over the next few weeks, Derek proved invaluable. His insider knowledge helped them strengthen their defenses in ways no one else could have suggested. More significantly, his presence became a testament to the possibility of change. The village council initially resisted Derek's involvement, but Samuel stood firm. "The forest doesn't hold grudges," he told them. "It adapts, integrates, finds new balance. We could learn from that." Working alongside Derek, Samuel saw the younger man's expertise resurface. He knew tracking, understood wildlife behavior, and shared Samuel's respect for the natural world. Together, they began offering wilderness awareness workshops to the villagers, teaching them to read the forest's signals. Martha's appearances became more frequent, as if she too approved of this new arrangement. One evening, as they tracked her prints with a group of eager students, Derek spotted something concerning. "These other tracks," he said, pointing to marks Samuel had already noticed. "My old crew. They're scouting again." The news spread quickly through their warning network, but this time, panic didn't follow. The community had changed, grown stronger, more connected. They implemented their preparedness plan calmly, confident in their ability to protect themselves. When the bandits finally made their move, they found no easy targets. Every approach was watched, every vulnerability addressed. More surprisingly, they found former victims willing to offer a chance at redemption. Following Derek's example, Samuel watched with pride as his community demonstrated the lessons they'd learned: strength through unity, wisdom through understanding, and the power of second chances. One by one, the remaining bandits faced a choice: continue their destructive path or join a community that had learned to balance justice with mercy. Some chose to leave, but others, inspired by Derek's transformation, stayed to make amends. The forest seemed to approve of these changes. Wildlife sightings increased, with animals showing less fear of human presence. Martha brought her cubs closer to the village, creating opportunities for the children to observe them safely under Samuel and Derek's guidance. As autumn deepened into winter, Samuel reflected on how much had changed. His modest cabin had become a gathering place for both wildlife and humans seeking understanding. Derek had found his way back to his true calling, now training to become the village's first official wildlife officer. The community had discovered that their greatest strength lay not in walls or weapons, but in their connections to each other and to the wilderness that surrounded them. One morning, watching Derek teach a group of children about animal tracks in the fresh snow, Samuel felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The forest had led them all to this moment, turning fear into understanding, enemies into allies, and a scattered community into a unified whole. Martha watched from the tree line, her cubs playing nearby, a living symbol of the wild heart that had brought them all together. The harshest winter in decades gripped the village, testing the newfound bonds of the community. Snow piled deep against Samuel's cabin as he and Derek prepared for their morning patrol. The transformation of their relationship from adversaries to partners still amazed many, but to Samuel, it felt as natural as the changing seasons. Storms getting worse, Derek observed, checking their emergency supplies. Might need to check on the outlying farms. Their morning rounds had become a village institution, combining security patrols with wildlife monitoring. They found Martha's tracks near Johnson's farm, noting how she'd steered clear of the livestock areas, a sign of the growing harmony between wild and domestic spaces. The radio crackled with Tom's voice. "Samuel, we've got trouble. 3 families stuck up at Pine Ridge, running low on supplies." The mountain settlement had always been vulnerable during winter storms, but this year's unprecedented snowfall made the situation critical. Samuel and Derek exchanged glances, both knowing the risks. "We'll need snowmobiles and the strongest riders," Derek said, already planning, "and we'll have to watch for avalanche conditions." The rescue operation mobilized quickly, showcasing the community's new efficiency. Former bandits who had chosen redemption now worked alongside longtime residents, their knowledge of mountain passages proving invaluable. As they prepared to depart, Martha appeared at the forest's edge, her presence somehow reassuring. Samuel had learned to read her behavior like a natural barometer, and today she seemed calm despite the storm. The journey to Pine Ridge tested everyone's resolve. Halfway up, they encountered a fallen tree blocking their planned route. Derek's experience proved crucial as he guided them through an alternate path, one he'd once used for less honorable purposes. "Nature has a way of turning our past mistakes into present wisdom," Samuel observed, earning a thoughtful nod from his former adversary. At Pine Ridge, they found the families managing surprisingly well. Having adapted Samuel's teachings about community resilience, they'd shared resources, created communal sleeping areas to conserve heat, and even established a small greenhouse using old ranger techniques Samuel had shared. The supplies were welcomed with gratitude, but more remarkable was the sense of connection that had developed between the mountain settlement and the main village. As they prepared for the return journey, one of the Pine Ridge children spotted something extraordinary: wolf tracks circling the settlement's perimeter. Derek studied them with growing excitement. "They've been keeping other predators away," he realized. "The pack's actually been protecting the settlement." Samuel smiled, remembering similar observations from his ranger days. "When we respect their space, they often return the favor." The return trip proved even more challenging as the storm intensified. Following a sudden noise, they discovered a young moose trapped in deep snow. Without hesitation, the rescue team worked together to free it. Former bandits and villagers united in purpose. The experience crystallized everything Samuel had been trying to teach, that compassion and cooperation were as vital to survival as any physical resource. Back in the village, the success of the rescue operation sparked a new initiative. Under Derek's leadership, they began establishing emergency supply caches throughout their territory, marked with symbols that blended with the natural environment, a system inspired by both his past experiences and Samuel's wildlife knowledge. The winter's challenges brought unexpected gifts, stronger bonds between outlying settlements, deeper understanding of wildlife patterns, and the final integration of reformed bandits into the community. Even the most skeptical villagers now acknowledged the wisdom of Samuel's nature-based approach to security and survival. One evening, as Samuel and Derek shared coffee on the cabin porch, watching Martha, and her cubs forage at the forest's edge. Derek broke their comfortable silence. "You knew, didn't you? When I first showed up here, you knew I could change." Samuel considered the question, watching his breath form clouds in the frigid air. "The forest taught me that everything seeks balance eventually. Even the fiercest storm leads to new growth." They sat quietly, observing as the cubs played in the snow, their mother keeping watchful guard. The scene represented everything they'd achieved, wild and domestic, past and present, all finding their place in the greater whole. As winter deepened, the village continued to evolve, each challenge strengthening their connections to each other and to the wilderness that had become their greatest teacher. The forest, as Samuel had always known, held lessons for those willing to learn, turning even the coldest season into a time of growth and transformation. Spring arrived with a burst of renewal, painting the forest in vibrant greens and bringing with it a sense of transformation. Samuel stood at his familiar spot on the porch, watching the sunrise illuminate a changed landscape, not just in nature, but in the community itself. The village was preparing for its first forest festival, an idea that had grown from the winter's experiences. Derek approached the cabin, no longer the uncertain man who had sought redemption months ago. As the village's newly appointed wildlife officer, he carried himself with restored purpose. "Everything's ready for today," he announced, joining Samuel with their usual morning coffee. "The whole valley's coming." The festival was more than a celebration. It was a testament to how far they'd come. Stands showcasing wilderness education sat alongside displays of traditional crafts. Former bandits now led tracking workshops, their skills repurposed for conservation. Children ran about wearing masks of forest animals, their games incorporating lessons about wildlife behavior. Martha's presence was honored through stories and art, though the bear herself watched from a respectful distance, her new cubs learning the boundaries between their world and the human one. Samuel moved through the festivities, his heart full at the sight of his life's work bearing such unexpected fruit. The Peterson farm, once the site of confrontation, now hosted wildlife viewing platforms. Tom had established a community alert system that blended modern technology with ancient forest wisdom. Even the most skeptical villagers had embraced the new way of living, finding strength in their connection to the wilderness. As the day progressed, Samuel found himself sharing stories with visitors from neighboring communities, all eager to learn from their example. "It's not about controlling nature," he explained to an attentive audience. "It's about understanding our place within it." Derek's voice carried across the gathering as he led a demonstration on reading animal signs, his past giving weight to his words about transformation and respect. The festival's highlight came as dusk approached. The community gathered around a central fire where Samuel was asked to speak. Looking at the faces lit by firelight, reformed bandits beside longtime residents, children sitting with elders, visitors mixed with locals, he saw the forest's greatest lesson made manifest. "A forest doesn't thrive through the strength of individual trees," he began, his voice carrying years of wisdom. "It thrives through connections, roots intertwined, species dependent on each other, every element playing its part. We've learned to do the same." The truth of his words was evident in the nodding heads and knowing smiles. They had built something remarkable, a community that drew its strength from understanding and protecting the wild heart that sustained it. As night fell, Samuel made his way back to his cabin, accompanied by Derek. They paused at the sight of Martha and her cubs at the forest's edge, their silhouettes visible in the moonlight. "You know," Derek said quietly, "when I first came here, I thought I was just looking for a way out of trouble. Instead, I found a way forward." Samuel nodded, understanding perfectly. The forest had given them all a path to something greater than themselves. Looking out over the valley, where festival lights twinkled like earthbound stars, Samuel felt a profound sense of completion. His life's work had evolved beyond anything he could have imagined, creating a legacy that would continue through Derek and the transformed community. The next generation would grow up understanding the delicate balance between wilderness and civilization, between justice and mercy, between past and future. Martha led her cubs back into the forest, their departure as natural as their arrival. The cycle would continue, new challenges would arise, new lessons would be learned, but the foundation they'd built would remain, ready for tomorrow's patrol. Derek asked, preparing to leave. Samuel smiled, feeling the weight of all the seasons that had led to this moment. Always, he replied, knowing that each day brought its own gifts, its own opportunities to learn and grow. As he settled into his chair for one last evening contemplation, the forest whispered its ancient songs, wolf calls echoing in the distance, wind rustling through new leaves, the eternal rhythm of life continuing its dance. Samuel Matthews, retired ranger turned community elder, sat in peaceful contentment, knowing that his greatest achievement wasn't in the battles he'd won or the changes he'd sparked, but in helping others find their own connection to the wild wisdom that had guided him all along. The forest would keep its secrets, share its lessons, and continue shaping those who learned to listen, long after this chapter of its story had ended.